Hey, welcome to Ashtabula Hobby Talks. I'm your host, Rykus, owner and comic book enthusiast, of course, and owner of Captain's Comics in North Kingsville, Ohio. And I'm here with my co-host.
Hi, my name is Nemo, KE8PVL, president of Amigos Radio Club, Ashtabula, and amateur radio enthusiast. Welcome to Ashtabula Hobby Talk.
Awesome.
I think we'll just go ahead and jump right into it today. Man, my whole thing today is about FCC enforcement in the amateur radio community. So, my real question is the FCC stepping up enforcement action against FCC radio operators in general? So, just so you understand, and I'm sure all the radio guys checking us out know, but for everybody else, the FCC is our regulatory arm, and we have a lobbying group, the ARRL, American Radio Relay League, that kind of interfaces between the FCC and ourselves, so that to protect our bands and our license privileges through on the airwaves. So there recently there's been a lot of change in what's going on with the FCC and how it interacts with us. They did start charging us a little bit of money, not a lot. We have a 10-year renewal. Um, Over the last few years, they've started charging us a money. It's nominal. It's 30, $35, whatever.
And that goes straight to the FCC,
That
right?
that does. I'm sure somebody takes their top 5%, whatever, for the transaction,
Is that
but it
the
does go
only
straight to the FCC.
is that the only means that the FCC has the funding coming in, or they got sources coming in
Well, I mean,
anywhere
they
else?
got licensing fees coming in from all the big FM commercial stations, the cell phone networks, the TVs,
And then they regulate that throughout
and they
the
also
hobby.
regulate that. But that's separate from our hobby. Our hobby is a service within the FCC community that's on the airwaves because, well, let's face it, we're needed. I
Right.
mean, the hurricane that happened last year in North Carolina, Texas, all that area. Uh, it was amateur radio operators that helped put that together, the
Right.
rescue operations, and same thing many times in Florida, where there's a huge network of amateur radio operators that are part of the emergency response teams in Florida. Going back to Katrina, going back to 9/11, amateur radio operators kind of lead the way in those situations because when everything else is broken down and failed, just like we do with field day when we go out and practice, amateur radio leads the way. We're
It's kind of a very unique hobby because most hobbies it just benefits one person.
Yeah, yeah.
And the amateur radio that can benefit a whole nation.
So one of the things that's been happening within amateur radio over the years is it's sort of been perceived as weak on the regulatory enforcement side from the amateur radio perspective, and some of that is because uh we self-regulate, we self-govern, so to speak. We have a system in place that we call the volunteer monitoring program, and people go and they register and they become volunteer monitors, and when when they see people are violating the rules and regulations under Part 97 that we have laid out for us, they report it to the FCC, and in theory, the FCC is supposed to respond in kind and make sure that there's a follow up with that, and which can lead to prosecutions, imprisonments, confiscation of gear, all of that kind of stuff. Um, a lot of people would say that it would seem that they haven't done a whole lot of that over the last 10, maybe 20 years. Now we do have a brand new FCC director. Um, and I'm aware of many, or at least a few anyway, legal actions that have been taken over the last couple of years since he's been in place, and really even over the last like maybe 4 years, 5 years. It almost seemed like they've been stepping up that thing. But so it comes down to what they've been doing and why people are perceiving that it's been happening. And there's all kinds of things for it. One thing that has happened, which is out there, is that they have done quite a bit of cutbacks over the years with the staff, and it's not just this administration that's done it, but it's happened under this administration too, I believe, to some extent. But over the last 10 to 15, almost 20 years, they've made cutbacks on that regulatory agency. And with the people that are left over, they've really been focusing on what we would call pirate radio stations, which are radio stations that operate on the commercial FM and AM bands for the most part, and take up space in those frequencies that would normally be available to commercial users. Um, that's not to say that doesn't happen in our bands too, or like in the CB band, the public airwaves band, or the GRMS bands. That it does happen there too, but we're all self-regulating comparatively, whereas the commercial bands actually do rely on the FCC to be strict on that stuff. As CB enforcement, it's the same way. Citizen bands, public access band, non-licensed bands, they all have the same problems. So that's kind of where their focus has been. With the amateur radio volunteer monitoring system, there's varying opinions on that too. Some people don't want to be the snitch. Some people want to get on the radio and be the Karen, so to speak. They will say, hey, there are people on the radio that will say, hey, you didn't ID every 10 minutes. We're under that same regulation with our stations as like regular commercial stations.
So you say you use the term self-regulating a little bit.
Okay.
So does that mean? Could you explain that a little bit more? I think.
All right. So the volunteer monitoring program, it has a sort of a ticket system. That's kind of going to be the easiest way for me to explain it. So a couple things can happen. So a person signs up, becomes a volunteer monitor. Maybe they're listening to a frequency. And I'm not going to say we don't have our problem frequencies, because we do.
There's a lot of frequencies out there, right?
Yeah. I mean, we have a huge spectrum of radio comms. And on a contest day, you wouldn't think so, but in reality, we have a huge spectrum, far more than like just the regular FM spectrum or just regular AM spectrum. That most people are familiar with, like the radio. So you're asking how it works. So they listen. Those guys that are trained up in the volunteer monitoring program, they listen. And if they hear something that's not going down correctly, there's a couple actions that they take. Sometimes they get it right on the radio and say, hey, you didn't ID. You're supposed to ID just like a regular radio station every 10 minutes. And that's fine. That's more of I want to say a friendly correctional, proper radio use kind of thing. All of us should be a little bit about that. They sometimes just send you a postcard because they don't want to talk to you on the radio. So they just send you a postcard. Hey, maybe you were causing this interference. It might have been accidental. We heard you on this repeater frequency, and you guys were running simplex and you shouldn't have been. Something simple like that.
Have you ever got a postcard?
No. Well, I mean, I've gotten QSL cards. That's different. But no, I stay within our rules,
Right.
as best I can. So yeah, I haven't had any problems with that. Because I like the radio hobby. It's fun for me. But so if it gets too serious, then the volunteer monitors, and really kind of anybody can do this, but the volunteer monitors take priority. They can escalate that to the FCC. And if they escalate that to the FCC with proof, then the FCC is supposed to take action. But we still have issues that have taken place. But just recently, in the last couple of years, back in January, the FCC upheld a $34,000 fine for a guy who was, I think, in Idaho, and he was interrupting the U.S. Forestry Service's communications, trying to help in his words, trying to help give them direction on doing the forest fires. But they were like, no, we got it. Leave us alone. We didn't ask for your help. Which really, us helping in the cases of an emergency, as I said before, that's something we do. But either we have to do it because there's nobody there doing it, or we're asked to do it. And if there's somebody there doing it and we're not necessarily asked to do it, and we're doing it over their frequencies, especially, then that's a whole other subject matter. We're not. That's not the way we're supposed to act. Um,
There's other ways he could have went about that, right?
yeah, and
A simple
they
phone
were
call, maybe,
that
or
yeah, or you know, they don't do it so much anymore, but there used to be emergency frequencies that some places, or general calling frequencies, and that were on bands. Uh, Not since the licensed CB days, almost has that been the case, but it's it it I well, it's not, nobody does that anymore,
right.
so to speak. But yes, he could have called, and I don't know whether he did or not, but yeah, that would have been an option. In emergency situations,
I mean, if you're
obviously a lot of the rules go out the window,
right,
but
emergencies, they're trying to deal with the forest fire, and they need those airwaves open so they can communicate with the guy that's in the fire.
right,
And if someone's broadcasting in there, that's going to mess up their
there's a big difference between somebody getting on the radio and saying, "Help, my house is engulfed in flames, and I need somebody to put it out right now, and all my power's out, and this is the only way I have to get in contact with you," and somebody getting on the radio and talking with the air command for the fire department and saying, "Hey, there's a fire 6 miles south of here. I wish you would get so it doesn't burn my house down." And I'm not familiar enough with that case to
right,
make any more statements on it than that, but there's a difference. So, in emergency situations, by any means necessary, so to speak, but when it's all over and done with, you still may have some explaining to do.
right.
So, uh, you know, on another note of that, it kind of works both ways, because just this past year in May, a skydiving company was just well, they were just fined $25,000 for I think it was $25,000. It might have been something else, but they were on the 70 centimeter band, which is part of our amateur radio bands, and they were using our amateur radio frequencies for their commercial skydiving business. So it goes both ways. The FCC is there to protect us both on both sides of it. Um, even in the free bands, the 11-meter CB bands, a guy just not long ago was prosecuted for that back in May for spurious interference, spurious emissions, what we call it, and then also intentional interference. So these things are happening. I mean, even in the lower levels of our hobby, like the GRMS guys, there was a GRMS link repeater, and just to show some tolerance on that, that was up in central New York. There was a GRMS repeater network up there that was running, and they were told, "Hey, you know, you you can't do it the way you're doing it." And they were sent an email by the FCC and told to stop, and they did. So it doesn't always escalate to huge fines. Sometimes you just got to be reasonable, but definitely if you're messing with emergency services stuff, you got to be careful where you're going with that.
Absolutely.
Um, so they did shut that GRMS repeater down. So now there's still some controversy out there as to whether it's worth paying the FCC directly, because it used to not be, but it does seem like I couldn't find any real good stats as to how many tickets were submitted to the FCC lately, but it does seem like, just if you're looking back over the years, they're starting to ramp things up. So maybe we're getting some stuff out of there. Now, we do have frequencies out there that are, I don't know how the best way to say it is. There's some 40-meter frequencies out there, some 80-meter frequencies out there where they don't really, I don't want to say they don't follow the rules, but they don't follow the rules. And they are more free band, so to speak, than than they are amateur radio. And that's some of the stuff that we'd like to see cleaned up, I'm sure, as amateur radio operators, because those guys out there, I get it. You know, there needs to be a spot for those kinds of folks, but it's not kid friendly, the things that are out there. That's for sure. At least in those areas, and not the whole 40 meter band. You know, those guys kind of button it down, and they kind of stay in their, I don't want to say stay in their corner, but they stay in their frequency for the most part. Not that, you know, with all hobbies, you're going to have problems, folks, but
Right.
we're kind of left to figure it out for ourselves, so to speak. But when things go over the line, then we expect to see the FCC step in. So
Right.
that's kind
Have
of,
they took any steps or did they look like they're going that route of cleaning that up, or are they just leaving it alone?
well, I think they still have staffing issues. I mean, honestly, and they're getting hit with the cuts just like everybody else in government. So and they've been, as I said, they've had staffing issues for the last 15 years plus.
And that's when we're seeing a spike in the
And,
8 millimeter,
uh, so
the waves.
the well, I won't say it's spike necessarily, but that's where we're seeing. That's where people are kind of saying, "Oh, there isn't as much enforcement that's been happening." So lately, just lately, I've seen some pretty big cases that are going up. Now I think the ARRL does have like a list of their ticket system that they advance to the FCC, but I don't know if the FCC, if it's not a big case, they don't display it. You know what I mean?
So there could be some stuff going on. in the
Yeah,
back.
there could be a bunch of like, oh, we sent this guy a letter or a postcard telling him to cut it out, or we showed up at his house to investigate, overpower or spurious emissions and whatever, but didn't find anything or decided that it wasn't worth pursuing past that. So that stuff does happen, and there's no transparency on that end of it. So yeah, that's kind of where it's at for me. So
What kind of waves do you usually broadcast your shows at?
So you mean like the Wednesday night show?
Right.
Okay, so the Wednesday night is a net.
What's the difference between that and the other waves that people are
All
using?
right, so what you're thinking is you're kind of thinking of it along broadcast lines. So we aren't actually allowed to broadcast like a traditional radio station. So you have like the morning radio show, and they play music and they tell jokes and blah 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 blah, and you basically listen to two guys like us sitting in the studio laughing at each other's jokes and hoping that everybody else thinks they're funny too.
And they get paid for that, right?
And they get paid for that. How does
That'd be
that
great.
happen? So that's not what we do. What we do is nets. There has to be a purpose behind it. There has to be participation. It's actually kind of a forced social media
And that's
thing.
the difference between transmitting and broadcasting, right?
Yeah, because transmitting has an intent other than an intent of communication, other than broadcasting, which is just to spit it out there for anybody to hear. And that's basically the best way to describe it. With a net, so what regularly happens with that is, like, for instance, I have a list of people that regularly check in and participate. I go down that list to see if they're there that week. We do a joke, we do a discussion, we say hi to everybody. It's there's interaction from each person that's there. Now, people can check in for the numbers. They do that. I've got probably 2 or 3 people every week that just check in and say, hey, I'm just here for the numbers, and thank you for doing what you do. Great. That's fine. I'll take them. So, hey, we'll take the numbers here too. Click the like and subscribe button, please, and comment. Squelch that in there. You didn't think I could do it. Anyway, I hope that was a good spot. The producer's shaking his head.
He read your comments.
All right. So yeah, that's kind of the difference. And we're not allowed to do advertising. There are some things we're allowed to do, I regularly, if we're our radio club is going to be doing field day coming up here on the 28th and 29th. So of course I can make that announcement. Hey, our radio club is going to be out at Geneva State Park in Crabapple Picnic area doing field day, ARRL field day on the 28th and 29th from 6 o'clock in the morning on Saturday to 8 o'clock in the morning on Friday. I'm being told to hold on here. Yeah. We're not supposed to make money, so that's fine. Whatever.
It's a hobby.
Yeah, it's a hobby, and that's what we're in it for. It's a hobby. There's a lot of aspects to it, and hopefully, and we kind of rely on the FCC to help us protect that hobby, because that's sort of what they do. They're the enforcement arm. So yeah, that's kind of where it's at.
Interesting. I've learned a lot about your hobby. I must say, on the outside looking in, and now I'm hearing more of what's going on in the hobby. It's very interesting.
There's a lot to it, and
It
you
sounds
never.
like it. I feel like I'm only scratching the surface of.
It's so funny because people are like, "Oh, it seems like an old man hobby, or it seems like this hobby." Well, there's a lot of kids involved, and that's one of the things that really bugs me because the FCC, if they were kind of enforcing the rules set a little more for us, then some of these bands where it's a little rough around the edges, so to speak, um, you know, it would be better because you've got 8-year-old kids that can get their max level license. So you've got 8-year-old kids out there running around with their general and extra licenses, and they're coming. And if they come across these bands, they come home from school, they're playing on their radio or their dad's radio, and they scan past that. The stuff that they're hearing is not kid friendly, and I'll say that. That's what I'll say about it. And it makes us look bad as amateur radio operators. It doesn't expand the will of the goodwill that and of the amateur radio operators are supposed to have.
Of course, there's a thing called free speech, but we have to use that wisely.
Yeah,
and not in a way to negatively in the kids. I mean,
yeah.
they're just kids.
No, I will say, uh, uh, I've listened to them. That too. I can't disagree with all of everything I hear, but sometimes it's entertaining. Yeah, as our line producer just said, it's entertaining
I have
sometimes.
kids that play video games, and I don't like them playing certain games because of online content with them interacting with other kids. It's not the kids I'm worried about; it's other people I'm worried about. The adults using that as a
and
way
I get
to.
that because I watch a couple COD players, and and I would love to have one or two of them on our show just because that's a hobby too.
Mhm.
I'd love to get a couple of them on our show. So maybe we'll reach out to a few of them and talk to them about that. But yeah, the language that they get, great. It makes content and it boosts your views, and I'm glad that they're using it for that. Because some of them they'll put their shorts out there and they'll be like, this person trashed me and called me all these names. That's the gist of the title of the shorts, and then I blasted them. and that's great for the views, but is it really exactly what we want the kids to see too? I mean, there's something to be said about you can't protect people from reality, but at the same time, there is something to be said about maintaining innocence as long as you can.
Exactly. And as a parent, I try to find that line and keep my kids in the real world without them being corrupted by it.
Yeah.
It's a fine line, and it teeters a lot.
All right. Well, it looks like we're gonna wrap the stuff up. And thanks for putting up with me domineering the show today. Appreciate it.
Been entertaining.
All right. Well, we'll get into deep dives on a lot of other stuff as we go along. We'll expand. Hopefully, we'll be doing a couple of locations things soon, and we'll jump on that.
We got some things on the calendar.
Yeah, absolutely. So be checking us out because we'll be bringing the location stuff here. I guess we'll close it out. So thank you all for being here. Please again like and subscribe and comment in the comment section and share it with everybody that you can. And thank you to our XYLs and our wives and our friends over here at Evergreen Lake Campground who help us out with the space here. And Dan, N8DRL, Joe, K8DNF for making the flags for us. Appreciate you, man. Looks great. And take it away.
Yep. And if you have Wednesday free, check out the Joke Nut.
Absolutely. Thank you for plugging that too. Yeah, I can be found Wednesday nights on YouTube. Wednesday Night Joke Net just uploaded the latest one. If you are local to Ashtabula County, it is 146.895 is the frequency. Standard offset and a PL tone of 141.3. And if you are Echolink and you're checking us out that way, the Echolink node for that is W8IJC-L every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Check us out.
That's a lot of numbers and letters. You just say those too quick.
I see them every Wednesday night, so I know them.
So if you're looking for something interesting and a title for a comic book, I'm your guy. Come to my shop located in North Kingsville, Ohio. If you want to just talk about comics, you can find me there. And I love comics, so just come and talk. Hang out.
All right. Well, thank you again for being here, guys. We're wrapping it up. Show up. Check us out.